I thought you said Thunder was like the most complicated ethics ever.
Did
Like,
I?
yeah.
All right, so now chat can hear me again. Sorry, yeah, you guys thought I was muted. I should have told you I was gonna mute it while I was getting set up because like with Zoom you have to do a few things. Anyways, I won't keep too much of your time. I do have some questions here. I know I sent these to you earlier in the week, but a few of them got answered a little bit in Wowhead's thing yesterday,
Yeah, I
which was
saw that.
no, totally fine. But I need so what I might do to make up more of the time because I tried to add a few questions that felt good. But I might just, like go back and forth with you on a few questions if I have like a further question on it, just to try to fill it up. But I think overall it'll go pretty well. All right,
You
so
got it.
and nice to meet you as well. This first time I think we've ever met, and also first time certainly doing an interview with you. So and
Yeah, totally.
I've reacted to basically every interview you've done in the last 2 years. Love the way you talk about the game. Seriously,
Thanks.
you're obviously very passionate about it. I'm glad you're in the position you're in. So.
Awesome. I appreciate it. And I may or may not have been watching your stream for the last hour. So,
Oh no.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No. Dude. Okay. So he messaged me and I'm like, "Can you send in the updated questions?" I'm like, kind of like I'm trying to figure it out. But
Yeah,
okay.
someone
So
was like, well, he's streaming the questions right now. And I was like, all right, I'll just tune in there. That's just
okay.
fine.
No, easy, easy +1 viewer for sure. So,
Uh-huh.
all right. Okay. So first thing is kind of just about generally alpha and beta, just to kind of get into it, get it all segmented. You guys tackled alpha like totally differently, I think, this time than other betas. Like when we got Shadowlands, it was, we were in that Kyrian zone for like a month almost before like you were doing something else. This time it was like months later, I think we ended up getting to us, but it was so much more focused. Every week had a theme. And I feel like, I don't, for us at least, it was so much easier to consume the content. I just wonder for you all, do you all feel like you felt that way as well? Like, were you guys able to get much more focused feedback? Like, did it help in the development of the expansion in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the really early on when we were talking about what do we want our alpha and our beta release to look like. We were talking about like, what's our launch date? What do we want to hit? One of the things that we kind of discussed was, well, let's talk about beta and alpha and what we're getting out of that and how much it's improving the quality of the game. And one of the things we talked about was we actually spent a lot of time making sure that alpha and beta were in basically an accessible state. And that was like, well, that's a lot of work that we're not going to end up shipping with. So what if we were looking at our alpha and beta more holistically, actually finding enough something you're very familiar with, more similar to like our raid testing, where it's like, look, we're going to put the raid up on the weekend, then we're going to take it down. We're going to do a lot of iterating. It's probably going to be really busted for a while. So having to do that work to make sure it's constantly in a playable state was something that we took a major look at. And also just, it really helped us to, like you said, focus the feedback. Like where do we want people looking at? What's something that we're actively working on right now? And we could really use the feedback versus, well, people aren't going to be looking at that again for like another month. So let's just pull it down and revisit it later.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I don't think I have many other follow-ups to that. That's good. So I have two very focused questions about the Great Vault. I think in general, it's been obviously a great addition to the game because it basically just replaced like the old PvP and Mythic Plus Vault from BFA with way less options, and it's just way more full on than that. I would say it's an improvement, but it is kind of polarizing because like it's a reliable upgrade source certainly early in expansions and patches and seasons where like every week you're looking forward to it, you're getting something you need, and then later on, I mean, I noticed it in my Twitch chat, like people are like, oh man, I hate the vault, even though they loved it earlier, but it's like, man, this isn't something I could really look forward to. Basically, like, have you considered increasing the value maybe of, the bad luck protection tokens? Something you can do with that, some kind of loot targeting, maybe scrolls to add tertiaries, just anything along those lines of making the later part of the season feel like the vault has more relevance.
Wow, there's a lot of parts to this question.
Oh,
I guess I'll
sorry.
tackle that last one in particular because I think that speaks to a really important philosophical shift that we saw really, really around Shadowlands, right? And around patch 915, there were major philosophical shifts that we've talked about in interviews in the past, but this kind of gets to the heart of that. So, I mean, more just speaking to the larger problem or that idea of, well, what if there was this cool thing for me to chase, right? That led us down some paths that we heard a lot of negative feedback on, right? Like Korthia sockets were initially created as a like, well, this is maybe like a super long stretch goal, something that you can go after if you really want to min-max your character. But as we've seen, and the way I think about this is like there's power options, right? Like, well, you've got two different chest plates at the same item level. These are different options. But then there's exclusive power, right? Like being able to put a socket, or in your example, adding a tertiary. I can't get that anywhere else. The same way that like, initially we were like, oh, Korthia sockets. Well, you can roll that randomly on an item when it drops, or let's just add a way to add it to the item like deterministically. Those things very quickly become requirements, right? They're no longer like this stretch goal, this thing that maybe a very small percentage of the player base will look at as optional. And adding something like that to the vault will, I think, make the vault feel like, well, I have to hit this every week. I have to get all the tertiaries of my character before they're considered done.
Mm-hmm.
And, that kind of leads us back to the philosophy shift here where, what if your character could just be done, right? Like,
yeah.
What if we don't ask you to do things with content that maybe wasn't created to be done, 500 times on that same character? And we're really a lot more cognizant of what we're asking the players to do with their time. This is one of the major reasons that with Dragonflight launch, we've put such a focus on alts, right? Like there's been a lot of things that are really friendly to alts that are designed that way right out the gates, where previously we might have done that in a future patch. That's something that we did very intentionally and are really pushing that, like the Catalyst, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, we got a lot of feedback around like, hey, can I just send this cosmic flux across my characters? With the Revival Catalyst in Dragonflight, there's no flux currency that you need, right?
Yeah.
When you earn a charge, you just have it on all your characters, even if you made that character after you earn the charge.
Yeah.
So I think philosophically where we would be going with something like this is rather than adding something that would be just a stretch goal, something that you could constantly work on that new character, what if we added something like the ability to claim multiple rewards in a week to the vault as like a catch-up mechanic, or something that, an alt who comes in later could get more things from the vault. Like that's the kind of philosophical direction that we would want to look at for something like that versus, well, now I have to do a vault on, this character every week because I need that, avoidance or whatever. I could keep going in this one too.
No. Well, I love how passionate you are.
That's a lot to unpack.
No, clearly. I mean, actually, I've never even thought about that. That's actually such a good idea because I definitely think because there are times like, you can even use the like Hearthstone Battlegrounds approach of like being able to freeze something, right? It's like you get a great vault one week and it's like you have the two best items are like, oh my God, I got both of them. And then like, you had the option to be like, okay, maybe I can hold that for next week or something. Or like you said, pick both. It kind of solves. That is actually very, very smart. I hope you guys go down that path. And the philosophical shift makes perfect sense because, you could easily get into the lines of, oh, well, people early in seasons are actually not even taking upgrades. So they get the reroll tokens or whatever, like instead of actually selecting the vault. Like there has to be a clear distinction between the loot you're getting and the token you're getting for not getting what you want.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. And then just one more vault thing. So currently the PvP vault and the Mythic Plus vault operate a little bit differently. The PvP one, your eye level is determined by your rating. And your vault fills up with getting honor from rated things in PvP. In Mythic Plus, I think it's always been fine in the past because, an old 15 was just, you kind of just, well, a lot of people work up to 15s and that's fine. But some people just treated 15s as the thing they did to get the max out their vault and then they left. Now you guys have a totally different upgrade Mythic Plus progression system, basically. Like a 20 is not supposed to be what a 15 used to be. A 20 is giving you access in Mythic Plus to a reward you have not been able to obtain before. But knowing that, maybe doing 20 or 8 20s or 10 20s in a week is a large ask. Have you had any thought into maybe having the Mythic Plus one operate similar to the PvP where your eye level is determined by your level of dungeon you did, but maybe the Valor fill up is what fills up the slots?
Right. So that's an interesting parallel because I think for me, the thing that I look at is actually Mythic Plus and the Raid Vault having more similar parallels there, right? Like that's essentially the equivalent of saying like, what if I do, kill a Mythic raid boss and then I'm able to clear normal and I get all three Mythic options.
Yeah,
right?
very
like
similar.
That's
yeah,
kind of what you're asking for, and that's not. But the parallel to the raids is actually what I would look at as something that we would see that as, and maybe taking that one step further, like the vault again with PvP. There's some other things that we've talked about there where like, is PvP a great fit for the vault? That like we were just talking about coming in late to a season. with Mythic Plus and PvP, the kind of seasonal rewards are calculated at the end. So if you want to change your character for PvP, for instance, coming in later, and the percentage of my gear that comes from the vault, that can be pretty problematic. So there's other things that we've talked about there, but ultimately, like, no, that's not something I think we would want to do, because I think it's important to consider like the potential problems that could cause as well, right? Like, especially with season 4 having essentially uncapped valor.
Oh yeah, that was an experience. Yeah.
This would essentially could cause the same issue to pop up there, right? Where, well, I do my one high key and then I do spam a bunch of 2s. I think it's important that we look at the full picture of, what the feedback is there. Like, maybe there's actually problems with the way Valor is acquired. Like, why don't you want to run multiple 15s or multiple 20s? Like, what are other things that we can do to incentivize you to want to do that outside of just the vault? So I think that's an area that we would look at more holistically.
Right. Yeah. No, excellent. And actually, just a quick follow-up to that. Sorry, my dog is being cute. Quick follow-up would be, in the past, or in season 4, you did have uncapped valor. That was something that, like, you see the people who were super into season 4 were like, oh, this is great. I wish this was like this every season. But then you start thinking, like, okay, well then, like, why does heroic raid gear matter? And can you get too much gear too fast? Basically, just I think I know the answer, but, like, have you guys considered, or do you think it really makes sense at all to ever have uncapped valor in a real season?
Well, we're not going to do that for season 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So certainly not that. And yeah, I mean, I think the season 4 experiment, seeing that it was a much shorter season, seeing how that played out on live, definitely will inform future decisions. I think the thing that we have talked more about is, like, it's not that first week. The cap is actually different than when it goes up week over week, right? Like, it's not like 800 every week or whatever. It's a different value. So I think that initial number is something that we could definitely look at and potentially tune in the future. But there's a big delta between, uncapped and, whatever the number that we end up going with would be.
Okay. Great. So I'm going to move on from the vault to the catalyst. So catalyst talked about a lot last patch. There's been a big push, as you saw, even from me and other people, going into this, we're like, man, we really want the catalyst earlier. And I think a big part of this was a confusion between what we see the catalyst as and what Blizzard does. I think you guys absolutely see it as, and in this function, it is perfect, where it is a catch-up mechanic where, those charges are already accumulated if you're starting late, if you're playing an alt, right, things like that. But for a lot of players, specifically Mythic Plusers and PvPers, last season, that was the way they initially interacted and got their 4-piece in the first place, at that same timeline as it would be now. So basically, the question is, what do you think is, or what does Blizzard think is the proper time to maybe acquire a 4-piece in a season if you are an active player clearing a lot of content?
Yeah, so I guess the answer to that is, well, what kind of player are you, right? Like, ultimately, like, at the end of the day, raids, we want to be the primary way in which you can earn sets, certainly early on in a season. Okay. Raids were, once upon a time, it was the only way you could earn your set bonus at all. And with 9.2 with the Catalyst especially, that was where we really started to see other player types being able to earn your sets at all. So the Catalyst is actually doing a lot of heavy lifting, right? Like, for one, it's bad luck protection for the raiders, right? Like, we want them to be able to earn their set in those first few weeks through raiding or through the vault, and that's an opportunity for them when the Catalyst turns on to kind of complete those sets and feel like, all right, cool, I can get my 4-piece. It's very possible that we're a guild who's still progressing, so that'll help us maybe get over a hump of one of the bosses that we're fighting. And then for other people, this is one of the main ways that they're going to be earning that. And something that I think is actually pretty interesting nuance here is, like, we were just discussing this actually, like, for raiders, the kind of competition is early, right? Like, the world first race happens quickly.
This is a great point. Yeah.
Right. And for Mythic Plusers and PvPers, the competition is at the end of the season, really, right? That's when you're pushing the hardest. So we don't feel like it's putting you at a disadvantage to have the Catalyst and your set bonuses come online a little bit later for those types of activities. So, like I said, the Catalyst is doing a lot of heavy lifting. It's kind of trying to fulfill multiple goals, but ultimately, we want raiding to be advantaged for that first initial part and how you get your set bonuses.
That's actually a really good point. I don't think I've heard that point made with this question asked before. It's actually pretty insightful. Yeah, because my follow-up question was kind of just going to be like, okay, well, specifically now that a tier bonus affects everyone in PvP, Mythic Plus, and rating the same. So like the acquisition being from rating, because it's from there historically, how does that balance make sense? I actually think your answer about where the competition lies for each one of those things is actually very relevant. I don't think a lot of people have understood that. So that's a great answer. Okay, so couple quick talent tree questions. So how often do you think the talent trees will be iterated? So, and then maybe more, because I saw you answer this a little bit in another thing, and just to make it a little bit more spicy, will the talent trees keep their evergreen nature in patch content? So like, for an example, like 10.3 or 2 happens and it's like, okay, well, for this patch, you get like 3 more points or something in your spec tree, which would be literally borrowed, like kind of the borrowed power you're moving away from in the patch or in the past. Basically, yeah, just that.
I feel like you might be reading some of these questions from like a notepad, maybe. Like
I'm definitely doing that. Them. Yeah, it's hard for me to yeah.
Okay, sorry. I'll try to get to your answer. So yeah, like I said, you saw some of the previous answers, which is yeah, absolutely. We're going to be iterating on talents a lot, right? It's going to actually be a major focus of the combat and class teams, not only just at launch but also post launch. This is going to be something that we're really keeping an eye on. And looking to make changes pretty frequently. And with, you mentioned, without having borrowed power, it's something that we have a huge opportunity to really create a lot of interesting changes season over season or patch over patch by just adjusting kind of baseline talent tree options. And then for the question, I think your follow-up was like, would we add more talents in a patch? That's actually a really interesting idea. It is one that we have discussed. However, something that would need to be considered, like a potential problem is, well, what happens to like future us, right? Once we're done with Dragonflight, we're into the next expansion. Like, do we now have this case where, all right, I just hit like level 80 and now I need to go back to Dragonflight to get a couple talent points there? Like we need to consider what the like future ramifications of the system are, because, we want this to be, or it is, an evergreen system. This new talent system is here to stay, and we want it to be able to last not just all the way through Dragonflight and stay exciting, but all the way into, future expansions as well.
Okay, yeah, great answer. So just want to highlight, I think, some issues that a lot of players have seen. Actually, very, very few specs. So currently, there's 3 specs in the entire game that have a really important defensive piece of utility or an interrupt on their spec tree. Almost every other spec in the game, all of them except for 3, all of that happens on the class tree side, typically with less throughput options. But I'll just highlight just Moonkin and Demon Hunter, where taking Solar Beam or Netherwalk and immunity or a very impactful interrupt, they will lose anywhere from about 5 to 10% throughput to talent into these things. Every other class in the game, picking it from the class tree side, I think the high end is like 1.5% loss to do that. So a couple of these specs feel a little bit singled out. I think I kind of understand it, because you need to keep something spec related. Like, you don't want to put Solar Beam in the class tree, right? Like, but like, how do you balance that and deal with that?
Right. Those are very specific examples. That might be a better question for Brian, but I can say, philosophically, that was something that exact example is something that we talked a lot about and wanting to try to avoid, right? Like that, hey, am I going to give up a huge percentage of damage for this piece of utility? That's not always interesting options. We know what happens there, which is why we have, the class and spec talent tree, as well as the 2 different types of points, right? That was one of the goals, was to get back to some of that hybridity, to allow us to create, more viable options, more viable builds for players to play around with. Was that, okay, hey, you've got this class talent point, you can spend it over here, and then these spec talent points, that's where your damage is coming from. Don't sweat that. So if what you're saying is there is, a case where there's some very specific examples that you are ending up into those problems, then I'd say those are absolutely the areas that we need to take a closer look at. That's not something that we would be able to hotfix. That's potentially a pretty major change that would need to happen to the tree to make adjustments there. Those are the types of things that we would have to look at. Like I was just saying, the cadence that we're looking at is every essentially major patch or dot patch, we'll be making changes there. So that's the type of example of that. Yeah, absolutely. We sounds like we have some looking into to do there, or some work to do.
Okay, yeah, sure. That's great to hear, because I know that a few of those specs were definitely, because like almost every spec just had that design there. Like what you're describing is like, maybe a healer can get an interrupt for the first time in Dragonflight that hasn't had one before, but they might have to invest into some points. It's not going to be like right there. It should be an investment to grab something you haven't had before. So that stuff in the class tree has largely been good. There was just a couple of spec tree issues.
Yeah, totally.
So talent trees, again, just in general, very positive. But generally, you have not that many loadout options. So, for example, if you have a class that has 4 specs like Druid, and even without even trying to specialize it, which you could with how good the talent trees are, you could make a different build for every dungeon, depending on your group comp. You could swap things up for every raid boss, right? Even it's not as simple as single target AoE or PvP, right? But even if you wanted to only do single target AoE PvP, for a druid, you would not have enough loadout spots to do that. Is there any chance to get more options in game and not through an add-on to save more loadout spots?
Yeah, totally. So I think you just said it, but for a user who feels like they want that level of interaction where they want more than 10, a lot of people aren't even playing more than one spec across different content types.
Yeah.
So for someone who is, really deeply engaged with Mythic Plus, PvP, multiple difficulties of raiding, that's someone that we would consider like a pretty advanced user, and they probably have other add-ons installed. So, when we talk about our base UI, that's often the target audience might be different than some of the people that you were just talking about with examples there. So we have to pick a number, right? Like it can't be infinite coming out the gates for a multitude of reasons, not only like potential tech problems there with saving infinite things, but there has to be a number, and 10 felt like a pretty solid number out the gates. Not to say that maybe, we don't increase that over time. I giggled because I was having flashbacks to like the Hearthstone deck slots questions that team got all the time. Like,
Yeah.
Just give me more deck slots. Like I have a feeling this is going to turn into that for us, but at least we have add-ons as an option to increase that over time for other players.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna have to skip around a few things. I think I have a few more questions. We only have about 6 minutes, so let me see where I want to start here. Okay, I think I'm going to do these two. I'm gonna do one Mythic Plus one, I think, and I'll come back if I have time. How does the team feel about Thundering, the new seasonal affix? I think getting a seasonal affix like that to a balancing point to where it's not impactful enough or too impactful is very difficult. It's obviously built in to make it so, if you're a lower level Mythic Plus group and you just don't want to deal with it, you can just stack and get rid of it instantly, and it's very simple to do that. But if you want to min-max it, you really get potentially punished for that, but then also rewarded for doing it for the full duration.
Right.
How do you guys feel about it?
I thought you said Thunder was like the most complicated affix ever. Like,
Did I?
Yeah,
When?
I heard you say that. I was like, wait a minute, did you never play with Infested? Like,
Oh, Infested was a
like
totally different
out
thing.
there.
Yeah, for sure.
Sorry.
No.
Anyways, so yeah, I mean, as you might have seen, Thundering, our season 1 Dragonflight seasonal affix went through a lot of iteration, like a whole lot. And a big part of that was we were basically having to redefine the identity of what a seasonal affix would be, right? Like seasonal affixes previously, like one of the major kind of pillars and a huge weight that they would have to carry was changing your routing, right? Like a goal of seasonal affixes previously was this will change the way that you approach the dungeon, right? Like maybe, there's a specific route that you might take through a dungeon in season 1, and season 2 with the introduction of this affix, that should change the way that you introduce that. With Dragonflight, where the goal is to have a new dungeon pool with every season, there's a huge burden lifted off of our seasonal affixes right there. So we're really exploring like what is the identity, and where we kind of landed was creating this elevated sense of coordination, as well as mastery with how you min-max those things, right? So Thundering, as you see it now, when the affix becomes active, it adds quite a bit of health to the key, but also gives you the opportunity to overcome that, right? Like you said, if maybe you're not looking to time the key, you're just looking for completion, you can just delete the mechanic and not have to worry about it. But if you want to time it, there's a degree of mastery with the coordination required to get the extra damage to push the key past that, added health that it was. that felt like something where, increasing health and then giving the players the ability to, min-max this kind of buff that we're giving you to optimize the key felt like a formula that we could at least attempt to carry forward into future seasons. We'll see how that plays out, but that's basically where we landed.
Okay, cool. Also, I want to point out for the record, the current version of Thundering is not what I said that about. That was the one where everyone like shot out lightning from them and stunned people and stuff like that. I feel like it's changed a lot since then.
I think there were like two different marks or something also, I think, also when you said that.
Maybe. I don't remember.
I don't remember anything. I went through a lot of iteration.
Like a lot of people, I am often wrong. So who knows? It is in a very good spot right now. Okay. So a couple more. I probably have time for like two more maybe.
We're gonna ask the GCD one because I wanted to.
Oh yes, I can do that. I
wanted to pick your brain about that one also. So I'm curious.
Great.
What else you want to ask?
Sure.
But maybe we can save that one for last. It's up to you.
Yeah, we can do one before that. Let's see. Oh, there was one that you kind of answered. I'm gonna have to skip a lot, but I think here's a good one. So this is about patch content.
Sure.
Obviously not having you announce what you guys are doing for patch content, but just in general for the last, almost 6 years with, kind of like, I guess, the borrowed power era of WoW, Legion through Shadowlands, where you're expecting something in a new patch, like corruption or essences or double legendaries. And that's like a major feature that is coming along with the game. With this expansion being more evergreen, I imagine there's not going to be a lot of things like that. So outside of, maybe like a Korthia style island or, what else can we expect in patches going forward? Maybe a bigger focus on tuning, just like what's, oh, sorry, my dog just hit my mic. She is not happy that I'm not paying attention to her right now. Like what is the new, is there a new idea for patches? Is it more of the same, stuff like that?
Do you mean specifically like with the systems? Do you mean just like patches as a whole? Like what?
No, I mean like just like what's available in a patch besides a new Mythic Plus season, PvP season, a new raid, potentially a new island. Do you guys have anything else you're looking to add now that that big major borrowed power source is not going to be in there?
Okay. I guess I'll try to answer that in two ways. One, we fully recognize and understand that our patch content cadence with Shadowlands, that left a lot to be desired. That feels like, we heard loud and clear from the players that we need to do better there. We heard that feedback. We have a lot of plans. We're not quite ready to announce our full content, basically patch plans, but it has evolved quite a bit from what we've seen in the past.
Great.
I'll leave that there.
Yeah.
And then the second part of, without borrowed power, I think that, as the expansion moves forward, a few of the things, we have in our immediate focus are things like class tuning, PvP talents, talent tree updates, class tier sets. Dragonflight, I think, is a really unique opportunity to kind of assess the core design of a lot of what our classes look like without the added complexity of additional systems, right? Like there's no conduits, soulbinds, legendaries, Azurite essences, like none of that stuff is here. And one of the more difficult tasks about redesigning the talent trees was taking into consideration how all these different layered pieces might impact, core classes. So this opens up the ability for us to take a really close look at what talent trees are doing well and what we think we could be improving, hopefully giving us a lot more flexibility on updating individual talents or talent trees without, really throwing the balance completely out of whack. So the new talent system is very fresh still. We're really happy with how much iteration went into it, but we realize that there's a lot that could still be explored and iterated on there in future patches.
Okay, great. And then as you suggested, we will do the last one about the defensive GCDs. This was kind of lower on my list because I know you just got asked about one. It wasn't about defensives. It was about like utility stuffs like Death Grip and things like that. So similar idea, but just with, I guess, a few examples. So, and we haven't really talked about GCDs outside of that thing yesterday since the, the offensive GCD BFA style thing where you guys tried the, having all your offensive cooldowns on the global, but you wanted the like Arcane Surge, the new Arcane Power replacement. You wanted the upfront hit of making that feel awesome while also, and then you guys went kind of back on that on a lot of things. You removed the GCDs from a lot of those things. But since then, it's had a lot of people thinking about defensives because there's a few between different classes where almost seemingly identical abilities from one class to another. One is on the GCD and one is off, or at least very, very similar. And basically just what are your all's design, like what is your all's design ideas for functionally identical abilities having different requirements for the global cooldown?
Okay. So I'm going to play my trap card. The reason I want to talk to you about this is actually the first part of your question I think is really interesting. And I want to pick your brain about it, actually.
Yeah.
So I swear I'll get to the
sure.
Defensives on the GCD, but that initial part of, cooldowns, like offensive cooldowns that are on the GCD, and you mentioned Arcane Surge. Sharing a little secret, Arcane Surge was a pretty big experiment of ours. Like you saw in Battle for Azeroth, we took a lot of global cooldowns, a lot of offensive timers essentially, and put them back on the global cooldown. Trying to solve that problem of like, well, if I have multiple buttons and the correct answer, like objectively, is just macro them all together, that seems weird, right? Like that seems like a problem. So we were experimenting in Shadowlands with buttons like Arcane Surge to see like, hey, can we make a button for mages that feels like it's worth the GCD or feel like it's worth the cast time and actually kind of yoink one of those other cooldowns, right? Like Arcane Power essentially doesn't exist anymore. Arcane Surge is that new button. So I'm kind of curious, like, one, do you still think that Battle for Azeroth kind of problem as we identified with the big old macro was problematic? And two, like how successful has Arcane Surge been? And maybe that's not something you can answer, but that's something I would love to hear kind of like, chat or other people's thoughts on, because
well, first of all, excellent usage of yoink, but then it just in general, I mean, so I think the issue in BFA was a lot of classes didn't have that upfront element added to their thing. So they were just looking at having a 10-second cooldown where they do, I'll just make it up, just like 30% more damage.
We called it like the nuclear launch sequence where it's like, all right, this one, no, this one, no, this one, and then you do all this stuff.
It's like Unholy DK. Yeah, it's like Unholy DK Incarnate, but for other classes. Like they were given that issue of like, oh, well, just one of the 10 seconds I'm doing increased damage, I can't press anything. So it just feels bad. But then you actually, every cooldown you've added, I think since then, has actually been with that in mind. Not only the Arcane Surge, but when you're talking about Evoker, right? Like some of Evoker's biggest burst right now is stacking up a 20 stack of using blue spells and then using their cooldown, which shoots out the pyres and does like massive AoE, right? Like the same thing with the new rogue cooldown you added, right? The rogue cooldown is no longer Vendetta off the GCD. It is this big bleed that you put on them that increases you in some way. So I think the answer is the community is very well receptive to and enjoys having their CDs on the global when the effect that comes from that is worth it. And I think so far of all the examples I just gave that you added in this expansion, that is exactly, you do not see Arcane Mages complaining about Arcane Surge ever. I've never seen it once. Totally. Exactly, right? So the only time they don't like it is when it's like, okay, this thing I've always had and it's always operated like this. Now it's just worse because I can't do this thing. But the macroing thing is a problem, not even in incorporating new players. It's, if you have a macro that's /use like 3 different spells, that's super weird and counterintuitive, right? Even though it's probably normal to like maybe macro a 2-minute trinket into a 2-minute cooldown because that's just easy, right?
Yeah, and not only that, but like, when you look at, I would say actually just kind of all competitive aspects of the game, like in PvP, having this huge delta between the damage that I do with all my cooldowns up and then outside of my cooldowns, like that creates clear problems, right? Where there's burst windows and then basically nobody can die outside of those. In raids, it's one of the things that still bothers me where I can look at, 2 people in my guild, the exact same class, exact same spec, they're pushing all the identical buttons, but one of them might be messing up their timer window on the pole, and their damage is like 20% lower for the whole fight because they just messed up that like 30-second window.
Correct. Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy to think about. And then in Mythic Plus, other problems as well there. So that feels like a problem generally that would still be worth tackling. It's just a matter of like what the right way to go about it is. So I was curious to kind of hear how everyone felt about the current iteration of the attempted fix.
Well, it's also the duality of just damage class in this game in general, right? Like you have 38 specs and class. You do not. I think you said this yesterday about how it's okay for classes to have great strengths and great weaknesses because of how many types of combat and ways to do damage there are in this game. So while you have the Venthyr Moonkins of 9.2, like you said, doing all of that damage in their burst window, and then you also have the like BM Hunters of now, where if you look at their damage over a 5-minute thing. It's like a straight line. Both of those things are valuable in different scenarios though. So it's like it's cool to have both, but I understand what you mean where you're saying like, okay, if you're having a class that like if they mess up one thing, it's like for the next 5 minutes, like no single decision or action should have that much impact on your entire pool. Yeah, I get it.
Totally. And yeah, you just walked into the second part of the answer.
Great. Okay.
Which was the defensive cooldowns. I think the other part of the question was like two buttons that can look very different, but they have different cooldowns or GCDs associated with them. Ultimately, the answer there is kind of what you just said. Like we balance, classes as a whole package with different strengths and weaknesses against one another.
Mm-hmm.
We don't balance individual buttons against one another, right? Like there's a lot of room for texture, for nuance within those buttons. Like the simplest example, Ice Block roots you, but Divine Shield, you can kind of run around and still heal people or murder people in PvP, right? Like exact same function of I'm immune, but they have a ton of texture in terms of the differences between them. So we feel like generally there's a lot of design space to create strengths and weaknesses with the class there. And also when we were just talking about like, I want that button press to be worthwhile, often that button press, for the offensive cooldowns, I can't take advantage of until I'm off a global versus a defensive cooldown. It did something instantly, right? Like I am immediately taking less damage. It's not like I have to wait for my global to be back up again before I can start taking advantage of this. So that was just a couple of the reasons.
Sure.
There's more there as well. Like sometimes just history plays a large role in why certain buttons are different than others. But generally that's kind of how we approach that.
Okay, great. And I think you are 7 minutes over, so thank you for the...
Apologize?
No. I definitely thank you for that, for sure. Thank you for spending this time with me. I did skip a bunch of them, but I think honestly, I think we got through a lot of the good ones. But I think in general, people are very excited for Dragonflight. It was really nice to read yesterday from you and Ian, both giving different sentiments about how you from Blizzard are, you're seeing this as like kind of a rebirth as well. You're going through a lot of different ideas and stuff like that. It's really exciting for us to see. So thanks for talking to me today.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yep. All right. See ya. Ooh, okay, I left. All right, cool. Yeah, that was nice. That was cool. That was really, dude. Honestly, I wish. Okay, I hope I get to talk to him again, because him and Ian interview so differently. So that was the second interview I ever did. I did one with Ian and I did one with him. And Ian, I wrote like an entire like notepad of questions, and like I was 75% through it in like 12 minutes. And he was doing great answers too. He wasn't like just going right through it, right? And then Morgan is just much more thorough with all these answers, and I could have skimmed it down to have much better ones, I think. Obviously, I don't know if there was much way for me to know that before this, because like I really like this dude. If we were doing an Ian interview, I would have went through every single one on here, right? And that was great. He roasted you good. Not really, but I mean, either way, I like that though, right? Isn't that way better? Isn't him seeing one question I had laid out and him wanting to actually talk about it? I prefer, I feel like the last like 8 minutes of that interview was amazing, because it felt like we were actually just two people having a conversation in a Discord channel about something and kind of going back and forth about it, right? So maybe the next time I'm doing one with Morgan, knowing that he really likes doing stuff like that, maybe I will kind of format a lot of the interview that way, because I think that was actually really nice. Also, he was turbo prepared. Not only did I send him questions earlier this week, but he also apparently was watching my stream for an hour in which I like went through my full interview and added things and gave my reasoning behind it. So he was ready to go. Bro, you cut him off. He wanted to do more. No, I didn't. They're very strict with 30-minute timelines. They have like PR people like literally like looking at their watch, like telling them to leave probably for that entire 7 minutes that he was going there past that 30 minutes. That is for sure. Obviously I would talk to that guy for an hour or longer. It was really fascinating.